Good afternoon, everybody. DMGeezerjim here, doing another part of my recording series for dungeon mastering. And thank you for joining me on this YouTube journey. It's pretty thick. There's a lot of parts to it. I'm going to do my best to separate them into manageable pieces, giving you information about them while kind of trying to make sure that not kind of, definitely making sure that we're staying within rule as written and books as published. So it is a little bit wordy. It is a little bit slower. I'm not gonna say 10 tips to be a great DM in 5 minutes because I mean you're not gonna get anything out of that. I want to give you information, and more importantly, I want to be able to give you where that information came from, so you're able to absorb and synthesize the information, becoming a stronger dungeon master as you go. So in the series so far, we had my intro, talked about who I am, what I, my background, my main focus on D&D 5th edition being a collaborative story event framed in a set of rules between some friends that are playing a game, and that your single biggest investment should be the players at your table. And as long as you and your players are investing in each other as people, you're going to have a lot easier time with every aspect of TNT. You're going to have that mutual respect established. You're going to have that rapport. You're going to enjoy each other's company and playing for playing's sake, which takes a lot of pressure on you as a dungeon master as you learn how to administer all of these rules, set up adventures, build worlds, and all of that. All right. Session 2, we did the basics, just the bare basics. Literally the basic rules. What do they look like? Where do I find them? What do I, as a dungeon master, need to know? That was just kind of a touchstone. As you see, each thing in D&D as a dungeon master builds off of one thing below it and then builds exponentially out from it. So there is a lot to know as a dungeon master. You don't have to memorize a ton of it. That's what we're taking our time here to hopefully go through step by step. So episode 3, we broke down turn sequence, turn order, all that kind of stuff. Talked about the terminology in basic combat: action, bonus action, reaction, attack of opportunity, held action, etc., etc. Episode 4 was just a combat simulation. We got in, we threw down a fight, and we ran through what it was like and what the stuff we talked about in episode 3. We put into practice in episode 4. Bit by bit, step by step, a very fun, very basic breakdown of it. Episode 5, I really kind of took a step out of that and talked about rules, spell rules, excuse me. You need to be familiar with spells, all of that stuff. And then last episode, we talked about what is an adventure. And that was our first dip into the Dungeon Master's Guide proper. So everything that you've been able to play with so far has been available in the basic rules, player handbook driven stuff. So now we're taking a second dip into the Dungeon Master's Workshop. Not the workshop, excuse me, the Dungeon Master's Guide. I want to take a look at chapter 8, running the game. So I'm going to flip over real quick. We are using D&D Beyond, just ease of access. I can actually show you stuff. This is, apologies in advance, going to be a little bit wordy, a little bit reading word for word in some cases. Sometimes we're going to step back a step and talk about applications and potential challenges. But again, in staying with the theme of this series, I want to make sure that we're sticking to content that is readily available to everybody. If you're a dungeon master, you get the Dungeon Master's Guide. If not now, then later, and you'll be able to find this stuff. I don't want to make up stuff. I don't want to need to go sending you over to Article 4 of XYZ in Dragon Magazine 7, published in 1986. That doesn't help you. It doesn't help anyone. Let's go with public content, available content, and standard content is a better way to talk about it, and then kind of let you find your way from there. So, staying in theme of this series, that's what we're going to go with. The first thing is table rules. We talked about that really early: fostering respect, avoiding distractions, telephone time, that kind of a thing. Those are house rules. That stuff we'll touch on. We touched on in my episode 1. We'll touch about it in session 0 as well. Table talk, just kind of briefly going into this. This is a discussion, expectations about exactly how are you talking at the table. Make sure that you've determined something for your party to use when they're out of character but within game. Me, Hagar, smash. Okay, this is Jim, and Hagar is interested in doing this. So out of character, can Hagar do this, for example? In character, me always Hagar. out of game, I might go, man, I'm hungry, dude. I need to go grab me something to eat right now. Did Hagar say that? No, that was out of game. That's really all that is. Making sure that you have a distinct, different system to know when your characters are speaking as their characters, when they're speaking within the game, and then when they're speaking as the people. So there's like 3 tiers here, okay? And give them a chance. Are you going to retract stuff? There's always my players will always fall for it. It's like, is that really what you said? No, 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 no. I'm like, okay, sucker, that was the clue. It doesn't matter. That's a personal aside. But are you giving your players? Are you going to decide if your players are going to have a chance to retract something that they're saying, even in character? That's one of those things that you determine as a dungeon master. You're setting these specifications to work with your players to enable better communication at the table. Okay, die rolling. Um, this is basically discussing: are you rolling in front of your table, or are you rolling behind a screen? If you're playing digital, are you sharing your rolls or not? And same for your players. Make sure your players are. This is dice etiquette. Are the dice being rolled where everyone can see them, or is that dude rolling that dice and he's got his hand like that? That's a 17, and he's got it picked up before anyone sees it. It sounds dumb, but there's always someone that got to play around silly with their die rolls. Not always, but you'll end up encountering some people. Set your expectations on the front end. Now, this is going to double down for you as a dungeon master. When you do this, if you're rolling in front of your group, you're committing to them saying that I have no impact on this. What the dice decide are what the dice decide. That adds a lot of danger, that adds a lot of realism, but that can also add some unforeseen consequences of ending a campaign really early because the dice decided to kill your people that night. But at least you're never going to get questioned for being arbitrary. Everything is always up to the dice if it's in front of everybody. Rolling behind the screen consequently gives you the freedom to take that critical hit and make it just a hit. Gives you the flexibility to adjust rolls as necessary to suit the story and the adventure. More of the producer aspect that we talked about. But that's up to you. You're going to decide that on yourself. But the one thing I'm going to tell you as a dungeon master, be consistent. You start out rolling in front of your group, always roll in front of your group. Even if it ends your campaign early, at least y'all saw it wasn't me, it was the dice, and I'm really sorry. I guess let's roll new characters and start again, or is what it is. The flip side of behind the screen is you have a lot more control on that. It's up to you. Your players may always question if you're being too nice or too mean or whatever. Rolling attack and damage at the same time, complete dice etiquette. I prefer going one after the other because most of the time it's not a big deal, but sometimes if they're fighting and they're able to kill something, there's a lot of confusion on what they did do and didn't do. Well, I rolled 4 dice, 2 of them hit. This was this one, that was that. Okay, well, that one killed that one. Well, can I move that one's damage over to the other? No, 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 no. Be consistent with that. Make sure you're consistent with the rule up front. If you want to do it that way, do it that way. You just got to make sure that you're clear that there's no hit swapping. That the 17 that the barbarian hit the opponent with that had 2 hit points lands on the 2 hit point opponent with, and the 4 that he hit the guy that had 19 hit points hits that guy. A lot of times, oh well, could I just use the 4 to kill the 2 and the 7? No, sorry. That's why I roll them in order personally. Roll, hit, damage. Roll, hit, damage. Roll, hit, damage. It takes a little bit more time, but at least we're definitely more accurate about our target selection. It's up to you. Rules discussion. This is an overall policy thing. We'll touch on some of this stuff in session 0. A lot of what we're talking about is things that you have to decide on in advance and present to your group in session 0, coming soon. Make a determination right now, early on. Hey, if I mess up a rule, or if you mess up a rule, we're going with it in the moment, and we'll look it up after. Someone take a note, we'll look it up after, and we'll revise accordingly. Keeping the pace of play. Or is it important that you learn the rules as you have a live example of them? Hey, when something comes up, let's stop, look at the rules so we're all in accordance and we're all learning from it. Both versions are absolutely valid. Just make sure that you guys know up front what's going on. The plus side about version A is you get immersed in the moment. You have a lot of fun. No one really breaks the pace of combat. The downside is you'll make a lot of mistakes that you're not even aware of because you'll forget to look them up later. that you end up building some bad habits on. But if everyone's having fun, it's not a big deal, right? Option B, stop and learn. Positive side is everyone's going to have a live moment in action. If this happens, then that happens. If this rule applies, then that rule applies. So you're going to learn rule as written within context of that moment. You'll be able to, you know, pick up and everyone's going to get better. The downside is early in your games, as you're getting into being a dungeon master, as your players are learning the game, you're going to have a very, very slow pace of play because almost everything is going to be looked up in the rules. Look it up, look it up, look it up. So both of those are the extremes. You can land somewhere in the middle, but I promise you're gonna experience both sides of that spectrum. So make sure that you're committing to it per group. Metagaming. We'll take a second to talk about metagaming. There's lots and lots and lots. There's probably as much crying and bitching about metagaming, and I was one of the hardcore anti-metagamers when I came into D&D 5e. I've softened quite a bit on it because this may be arrogance, but this is my campaign. I can adjust as I need to. If you know that the way that Descent into Avernus is going to go, I'm going to throw out half of it and bring in 3 or 4 encounters from one of the dozens of modules that I have or that are already set in Hell, Abyss, and Farn. I'm okay with that. I don't care what my players know. Personally, I want my players interested and invested in Dungeons and Dragons. I want them to enjoy reading the book. I want them to learn about the monsters for their own sake, for the passion of the game, as it were, the spirit of the game. Now, invariably, that leads down to my players know they've read the monster manual because I've encouraged them to check this stuff out, check this cool stuff out. So when it comes to battle time, now, what pisses me off is when I watch a dude pull a monster manual off the shelf on the camera. Like, really? Could you be any? That hasn't happened in a long time. And I just want to look at the picture. Yeah, no, look back at the screen. I'll put up art for you. It's okay. Don't worry about it. But it doesn't matter like it used to. Basically, metagaming is the concept that a player, the person, has a large amount of knowledge about the universe, the game of Dungeons and Dragons that character you're playing piece in the moment is not aware of. So when the player is making decisions for their character based on information that their character would never be aware of, that's what people think of as metagaming. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of metagaming is kind of also mixes in with the concept of min-maxing. You know, I'm going to spend a bunch of time researching all of this, so if I can get this 18 levels in this, 2 levels of this, get these 3 feats, get this weapon, get this shield, and get these 6 spells, and then get this necklace, I'll be unstoppable. Some people call that metagaming. I kind of agree with that because at a low level, your character doesn't know any of this shit exists. But you should have fun building your character out. So I don't stress about that as much as I used to either. But so I'm going a long way around of telling you that each dungeon master is going to wrestle with the concept of metagame thinking and metagaming proper in their own way at their own pace. If you are a very restrictive DM and you don't want your players to have access to any of those books, that's your choice. Be cautious about how you penalize them for it. I've been a little bit overly harsh on some of my players using plot points that there's no way. I mean, not even stuff in books, but plot points that we kind of discussed. Well, if we're supposed to do this, we're supposed to do this. Well, that'll happen. We just got to tell them this. You can't do that. You don't know that. You're not even supposed to know that. You know, that kind of thing. Metagaming is going to happen no matter what. A 3-year group, it pops up. So just have fun with the movie. Relax. Understand it's part of the game. The more that you can focus on establishing your expectations at the start of the game, the less of a problem metagame thinking is going to be. But if you have informed players, if you have educated, informed players who enjoy Dungeons & Dragons content, you're going to be facing metagaming. Remember, it's a game. So just kind of learn with it. We'll talk about that we could go into our own an entire 45-minute spiel on just metagaming. We don't want to do that. Missing players, establishing early on what is your expectation going to be if you're short a character. You got a group of 4 people, and one person's out. Can you still play, or can you not? Are you able to establish early on here? I'm gonna flip back to the screen real quick now that we're done with spieling about metagaming. Establishing early on, how are you going to deal with missing players? Are you going to play if you're short characters? Are you the dungeon master going to run their character that session? That one of the other players, whatever. That's up to you guys as a group to decide early on. That's up to you guys, your particular play group. If you only have 2 players and then you as a dungeon master and one person doesn't show up, you probably want to cancel. The larger your groups, the less likely that is to be an issue. You can usually filter off one of the missing players. But this needs to be established because scheduling is always going to happen. Now, there's always going to be scheduling issues, man. I mean, that's the enemy of it. Hell, I've got a campaign, one of the few campaigns that I play in, that I'm almost, I don't think we've played in 6 weeks, 7 weeks. Something just pops up every week, and it sucks, but it happens. So make plans for that. And this is DM to DM. Come up with some sort of contingency to keep in touch with each other during the week. Make an effort as a DM to check in with your dudes, especially when you miss a week, just to maintain the communication and the spirit. Because, I mean, honestly, if you're going to go a month, 2 months without playing or communicating, you're going to lose the pace of the group. So that's a DM tip for the people part of it, managing the people. Make sure that you're staying connected with your players. Make sure your players are staying connected with each other when you go through a lag of gameplay time, okay? Life's going to happen. D&D is a lifetime hobby. You're going to have a lot of missed sessions. So next we're going to roll down. It gives you a little bit of information about small groups. That's something we'll talk about when we get into round 2 of adventure and campaign design. Basically adjusting gameplay for less than 4 characters. Okay, small groups is determining characters of 4. The whole game is balanced around 4 characters going into this encounter. So what the Dungeon Master Guide is going to tell you is to adjust the character count to 4 rather than adjust the content to 2. That is fair until you get more skilled. Early on, you want to go with 4 characters to simplify things for yourself. You really do. Especially if it's day 1 dungeon mastering, because that's what the game's balanced around. You'll have to shift enemy hit points around. You'll have to shift the counter numbers around. In some cases, you might have to remove certain enemy combatants because your player has no way to deal with it. It's more advanced stuff. So the small groups comment is to say, hey, make sure your 3 people have at least a 4th NPC henchman to make sure they can get through the dungeon. Don't force reluctant players to take multiple characters. Don't show favoritism by only allowing one player to play multiple characters. If there's 3 people, you need a 4th, and you're gonna let someone play an extra character, you better let all 3 people play extra characters and plan for 6. So then it breaks down again. So it's just a little bit of understanding there. The new player section, we'll talk about that in campaign design as well. But basically, this is the incorporation of a new player at a later point in the game. That takes its own thing because in addition to, a new character versus a new player are 2 separate terms. Let's keep that understanding first. Bringing a brand new player into an existing table is a delicate matter. Bringing a brand new character into an existing table, you killed someone and they brought a brand new character in. This is where we're talking about how to handle that. You bring them in at an appropriate level, integrating. So this is talking about the player, not the character. Both of them have different techniques. We can talk a lot more about that on its own. Shit. See, that's the downside. You start getting into DM guide, you start getting into some of the nitty gritties about DMing. The nitty gritty. I could literally talk for a half hour to an hour about each of these chapters here effectively and not cover everything that you're going to encounter. That's the dicey part. Didn't mean that as a pun. That's a challenging part of setting up this kind of a thing. To want to be thorough and informative without going 744 sessions deep, but also understanding some of the stuff that we're looking at. We will spend a session talking about. So I'll figure out a good way to segue them, and we'll put that together for future. The roll of the dice. How much are the dice going to impact your campaign? This is definitely a gameplay mechanic part for Dungeon Masters. Are you every single thing is going to be a die roll? Every single aspect, whatever, no matter what you talk about, no matter, and we're talking in extremes, okay? No matter what, I'm going to make you roll a die to do it. You may have given the greatest speech in the world and given everyone in the town 50 gold pieces to pay their taxes. Roll persuasion to see if they like you. You're like, okay. As a player, you're like, what? Doesn't matter. If that's what you decide to do as a dungeon master, that's what you do. Be consistent with it. Make sure that you have access to all the difficulty checks, difficulty classes, all of that kind of stuff. We'll get into that here in a little bit when we get into ability scores. But that's one extreme. Every single action that the players take is determined by a skill-based die roll. So the plus side of that is it takes DM arbitration out of it. It's not in my hands. That's your decision. That's your skill. That's your roll. The downside is it can basically become a what die do I roll to do this? What skill do you want for this? What skill do you want for that? And a lot of the role playing dissipates because of that. You just, if you go too far into everything's a die roll, your group stops role playing. They stop creating. They stop problem solving, because if they spend 40 minutes coming up with the perfect thing and you're still going to make them roll on it, why? Just give me the damn roll. So that's the extreme bad about rolling with it. The extreme good is it's not up to you as a dungeon master. The decisions they make result in this check, which results in this die roll. So good, bad, or ugly, they cannot be. You can't be. You can't be judgmental this way. The players can't accuse you of being unfair. The dice decide what the dice is. Okay. The next example is called ignoring the dice. One approach is to use the dice as rarely as possible, using them only during combat, and determine successes or fails as they like in other situations. This is the creative aspect, the role play heavy. That if you came in and gave me the speech of a lifetime and gave every villager in that town 50 gold pieces to pay their taxes, there's absolutely no reason for me to make them. They love you. There's no role in that situation, you give me some good. You're looking around for I want to check for traps. What do you want to do? Just what do I roll? Okay, give me perception. I roll of 14. The hallway looks good. I want to check for traps. Okay, what do you want to do? I'm going to take the butt end of my spear and I'm going to forcefully tap on the floor where I'm standing, and then I'm going to tap on the next tile as I move forward to see if there's a distinct change in the sounds. While I'm doing that, I want to scan off to my left and see if there's any honeycombing or any holes in the wall. Okay, I'm going to look around on the right side and see if there's a bunch of cobweb built up or if it's all clear. Okay, you guys ain't got to roll. You're going to find the trap based on what you told me to do. I don't need to make you roll perception. So that's one of the things. Those two things are hard to mix in. I mean, you could justify and say, well, you weren't listening well enough to. No, come on. So ignoring the dice is the other extreme of that. The downside of that is it can slow your game down quite a bit, and you'll spend a lot of this time in discussion of yeah, but this equals that, but this equals that. That becomes a lot more arbitrary. You have less reliance on the rule as written to back up your gameplay. You're making judgment calls as a DM, deciding success or failure based on how you feel their plan, their idea, their speech was presented. You're using rolls during combat. You're using rolls for, when you absolutely have to. Everything else is decided through dialogue, which means the game's going to take longer. Less things are going to get done, and you're going to have just as many rule arguments here as you will in the other thing. The plus side of this is it encourages player creativity, encourages role play. It encourages your players to invest time into good thinking, good thought out plans or processes to move forward. And, it goes from there. So there's pluses to minuses to both, and you obviously have the middle path that most of us end up on. And the problem with the middle path is being consistent, making sure that your players know a situation that they can role play well in to resolve, versus knowing that I can use all the words I want in the world. At the end of the day, I have to beat this door down, Can we use a crowbar leveraged by him and I'll smash into it? Yeah, you have advantage on the roll. Okay, cool. It sounds like there's something. Well, no, he's using his help action to help you break the door down. That's advantage. But you're still, rewarding their creativity, right? So keep that in mind. So that's the dice. Why do we use the dice? We use them to maintain to for ability scores, for attacks, which we talked about back in the combat thing, for saves, which we kind of touched in the the combat section, for difficulty class checks, skill checks, which we kind of touched on in the combat section. Um, that's what the ability scores are used for. That's what our dice are used for. So, understanding a couple things here: ability checks versus saving throws. So, ability checks are what your character is using a specific stat for when what they are using an ability slash attribute for while they interact with the world around them. An ability check is similar to a skill check. They are an interchangeable term, but they're not necessarily always an interchangeable role. Ability checks, skill checks are almost always interchangeable. Almost, okay? Multiple ability checks is talked about here. I saw an interesting article on that. If at what point do you deem a failure or an automatic success an automatic success? You need to know that as a dungeon master. I'm barging at this door to break it down, and I fail. I'm going to do it again, and I fail. At what point, as a dungeon master, are you going to let them? This is an immovable, unbreakable door. No matter how many times you hit it, you're going to fail. Or are they going to eventually cave it in? So maybe you just kind of hand it to them on the third. Multiple ability checks, because I fall victim to this too. I'm going to take a look at that puzzle box and see if I can figure out where a latch is. Okay, give me an investigation check. I rolled an 11. Shit. I'm going to take the puzzle check and, okay, give me an investigation. Shit. So, for me, I want to let that, because I want to let everyone at the table have a stab at it. But if there's multiple people at the table, I'm not going to let the same person go twice. You're done. If someone else wants to try, they can. Maybe as they tinker with it, it comes back around to you. They've joggled something loose. So this time, you can manage that. That's going to come up in a multiple ability check situation. You can also make a situation where it's impossible to do it again. They moved in, they smashed that door, they hit the door, but now the hinge is bent. They're going to have to break it down with an axe. The door's just not going to pop off anymore. It's gotten wedged further into the jam. You're not going to break it down through a strength check, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Contested checks, grappled versus entangled, for example, arm wrestling contest, strength versus strength. The two contestants roll the appropriate stat against each other, and the highest roll, including modifier, will win the contest. It's right there. One creature's holding a door against another. Both use strength. Now, they're not always the same. They're talking about trying to hide. It's dexterity against wisdom. My stealth versus your perception. Okay. So, quick table talking about ability checks here. Just quick examples of it. Nice to have as a reference your first time through. Attack rolls, we covered that in combat. So as we talked about, ability checks are your party using their attributes, their abilities, to interact with the environment. The saving throw is the environment forcing the party to interact with it. Environment also includes combatants. Environment includes cave-ins. Environments include lava flows, geysers, glacial waters, all of that stuff. Anytime that your party is going to impart their will on the environment, which includes combat, they roll either an ability check or an attack roll. Anytime the environment is imparting its will upon the party gets a savings throw. Not anytime, but those are the triggering conditions. Saving throws versus the players, ability check is versus the environment. Keep it that way. Okay? Difficulty class, DC. You're going to see this ad nauseum. This is basic mathematical determination on the difficulty, the chances of success on something. Remember, without skill modifiers, we're using a D20. 1 through 20 is the number 1 through number 20. Each of those pips is a 5% chance. Cumulatively, if you look at it that way. 100% divided by 20 is 5. Okay? So quick math, each point on a D20 is worth 5%. So a very easy class with a DC of 5 is going to leave us 15 times 5 is 75% chance to succeed. Very easy chance, etc., etc. So you want to look at the DC table here. You want to understand that there's basically 6 tiers from very easy to nearly impossible. Each of those by default has a DC value of 5 ascending. Moderate is 15, nearly impossible is 30, so on and so forth. However you want to do the math in your brain to keep this on record, or however you want to jot this down, this is your reference. If something is very easy but not trivial, it's not a guaranteed success, but it's pretty easy, this is a DC 5, okay? Nearly impossible, only the best of the best is going to have any chance of doing this, and only if they get really lucky. That's a DC 30. Remember, this number is your target, the player's target. They're going to roll a D20, then add their associated skill or ability modifier to their roll to hit that number. Don't be freaking, oh, it's a DC 20, but they got no dexterity. I'll drop it to a 14. Too bad. That's your character's fault, not your fault. Okay? That's what makes a class difficult. That's why you want varying DCs, difficulty classes, to ensure that every character has a specific role in the adventure. If every DC is 10, 15, every single character at the table's got a chance to succeed with just a basic die roll. So keep that in mind. They don't have to go in increments of 5 is the other thing to understand. You can make a DC 6, you can make a DC 21, you can make a DC 11, hell, you can make a DC 16. It's up to you. These are your guidelines. This is by the book. You will find your groove, and this will be a constantly moving target as you play the game. Familiarize yourself with this table as a dungeon master, and then understand you have the flexibility to play with it. As always, I'm going to reiterate. If there is no chance of failure, don't make them roll a check. If there is no chance of success, don't encourage them to roll the check. If they still insist on it, let them roll. And when they roll natural 20, you go, you hear a click, and you feel for the briefest moment that door handle starts turning. But that click was your lock pick breaking as it jams up the lock further, preventing any more movement as the door is now stuck half ajar forever. They just learned it's nearly impossible. They got close. We can't tell them, no, you cannot roll. We can say, man, it's going to be likely almost nearly impossible to do it. I don't think you can do it. Sometimes players be dumb. What's my difficulty? What's the 2-hit to roll at the moon? You can't. Oh, that's fair. Until they come up with a character build that can fly up high enough to go fire through extra atmosphere, and because there's no atmospheric impact on an arrow, blah 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 blah. You don't want to go with those people anyway, right? Honestly, by the time your player gets to that point, you'll be ready to have that discussion. So I digress. Automatic successes is a variant in the rule that you can decide early and often if they have a high enough. If this dude got a strength of 18, he's getting a +6 on his ability check, and he's got proficiency in athletics. He's getting another +4. He's got a +10 on it, and he's just, and it's a simple DC. You can just say you automatically succeed. Again, consistency is the key there. It's a rule variant. The downside of that, we'll work into where we go in a little bit farther, is there's something called multiple checks. I want to take a look at the old pot and see if I can read the inscription. I'm going to roll history. You failed. Oh, I'm going to roll history. You failed. Oh, I'm going to roll history. However, that's something else to prepare for. Repetitions of the task as your group goes through it. Okay, are you the DM that lets everyone take a crack at me? I am. We're all here to play. I'm going to hit it with my shoulder. You failed to break it. I'm going to hit it again. You still failed to break it. I'm going to hit it again. You still failed to break it. Do I have a chance to break it down? Well, yeah. Well, I'm going to keep rolling till I do. At that point, just assign a time. You take 5 hit points of damage to your, because of breezing to your shoulder, but after 30 or 40 seconds of constant battering, the door gives way. You can stop rolling at a certain point if you're going to automatically let them succeed anyway. turn it into a verbal exchange, turn it into a role play and a description situation. Advantage and disadvantage. This is something that is a big tool for your box. This kind of rolls back up, if you want my opinion, to the roll of dice. Whether you're rolling with it or whether you're ignoring the dice, advantage and disadvantage is a tool that's in your box to reward or punish. That sounds big. That sounds nasty. Why are we? If your party, we're going to use the guard at the guard at the gate, because there's not a single adventurer in the world that respects this dude. This is the first test you'll have of your will as a dungeon master when someone in your group walks up to the guard, and the guard says, "State your name," and they say, "No." Well, you can't enter the town if you don't state your name. You don't get to know my name, and you're privileged to have me in town. Well, you can't enter town if you don't give me your name. This is a dialogue opportunity for your players to step in on their character's behalf. Or, I'm just going to push back. I'm going to walk past him. I'm not going to stop. Guard blows a whistle. 4 more guards rustle from out the tower, grab you to place you under arrest. We can either banish you from the town or you can spend the night in jail while we figure out your name. Problem solved. There's no even rolls required at that point. Bad role playing leads to bad consequences. Yay. I want to try to intimidate the guard into letting me pass. Okay, go for it. Wow, you succeeded. The guard's a little afraid of you. You've had a negative interaction with this guard already. So they have to come back through this guard later. This is where advantage, disadvantage would come in. They've got to now go to that guard to get some clue. They intimidated him earlier, that he's upset, he's pissed at them. Well, I want to intimidate him. Roll disadvantage this time because he knows that you're just a peon. He heard from his captain nothing. Or I want to bribe him. Okay, it's going to go through. Advantage, disadvantage you can use to influence an ability check and a skill roll based on the party's feedback and play prior to this die. Advantage can be used with rolling with it, quote unquote, to allow for more party influence on the results of the roll. Advantage can be used with ignoring the dice, quote unquote, for the die rollers to want to do it, to make sure they're succeeding, give them a better opportunity because they earned it with their role play. So advantage, disadvantage is, there's also obviously mechanical requirements. This particular block is talking about how you as a DM can use advantage and disadvantage outside of the text box rule is written to reward or discourage your party's behavior, etc., etc. Don't look at it as just a mechanic of combat. While it certainly is, it's a tool that's in your box to play around with it. Inspiration, I'm going to tell you straight now, it tells you at the end of the chapter, and I'm going to tell you at the beginning of the chapter. Inspiration might not work for your campaign. Some DM feels it adds a layer of metagame thinking. Other feels that heroism, role-playing, and other parts of the game are their own rewards that don't need incentives like inspiration. If you choose to ignore inspiration, you're telling the players that your campaign is one where you let the dice fall where they may. It's a good option for gritty paint. So I'm starting with that because I ignore inspiration. Most DMs ignore inspiration. I do it for a couple reasons. To begin with, it feels arbitrary. It feels like you as a DM, which part of being a DM is arbitrary, for sure. Wow, you handled that really, really, really well, so I'm going to give you an inspiration point. So that means that the character at some time in that session can choose to spend their inspiration point to re-roll a d20 on something. Okay? Cool. But didn't we kind of already do that by rewarding them with advantage and disadvantage, or discouraging them with disadvantage? You guys roleplayed that really well. Handle your persuasion check with advantage. And obviously inspiration goes on top of that. It's an extra mechanic to track. You have to figure out a way to reward inspiration for multiple things, because not every player is great at dialogue. Not every player is a good tactical master. So eventually you're giving inspiration for everything to make sure that your party feels included, because you can't single out one particular style of gameplay as dominant that alienates the players that may not necessarily be part of that. Awarding inspiration for role-playing, for heroism. I did something really good. for genre emulation. You were so good with that accent that I'm going to give you an inspiration point. No, I don't agree with that. Come on, man. I can't do voices. That's not cool. Um, a reward for victory or strong role play. And it's not necessarily sticking with a voice, but maybe making a difficult choice. I know this is killing me to do it, but because my character is obligated to do that, it's basically rewarding for someone for saying, it's what my character would do. You're probably getting out of my negative connotation in my voice that I'm not a fan of inspiration. I don't care where you land on it. That's for you. I just want you understanding what it is. It's a reward outside of the normal bounds of gameplay for a character doing something. That point of inspiration can be used to re-roll a d20 at any point during that session. What and how you make that reward possible is up to you as a dungeon master. As I've been trying to harp on, you got to be consistent with it to make it fair for your group. And if you're rewarding one type of behavior, you need to consistently reward that type of behavior. And you also need to make sure that you're able to reward other types of gameplay. Okay, keep that in mind. When do you reward it? That's up to you. Tracking it is just a nice little note on the top of it. So, resolutions and consequences, degrees of failure, critical success, or critical failures. Rolling a 20 or a 1 on an ability check or saving throw normally doesn't have any special effect. By rule, there is no such thing as a critical failure. By rule, the only time you have a critical success is on an attack with a critical hit. There is no rule as written, critical success, critical failure. You can choose to take an exceptional roll into account if you want to. It's up to you to determine how this manifests in the game. But consistency is the key. So that's a decision that you're going to make before you start your campaign, and make sure you're clear on that in your session 0. Critical success or failure. Rule as written, there is no such thing. There is only critical hit. There is no other such thing. It's up to you to decide. I think that's back up in the air for D&D 5+. Okay. So, that's a lot of stuff in just these first couple sections. That's managing a game. That's managing the rules outside of combat. That's looking through here, understanding how ability checks work together versus ability check versus a saving throw. Ability check, party forces its will upon the environment through the use of their abilities. Whether that's their attributes or their skills, it's going to play out the same. Saving throws. The environment is exerting its will against the party, and they use their savings throws. That's almost always going to be a saving throw. Very rarely. Sometimes it's a skill, athletics or acrobatics. Again, very rarely. Typically, you want to use the saving throw when you need a saving throw. Otherwise, you're never going to land there's a lot of things that give benefit to savings throw that you're mitigating if you're using a skill in place of. So just make sure of that, okay? Difficulty class, DC. Be aware of this table. Make sure that you understand the graduations of it. After that, it's self-explanatory. After that, it's just a guideline. Always, I know I'm repeating, we're getting near the end of this. I just, kind of doing one last scan on this section of running the game, okay? This number is up to you, but there is no need for a check if it is a trivial task. There is no need for a check if it's an impossible task. Learn how to say that's impossible as a dungeon master. Learn how to say no, you can't do that as a dungeon master early in your career. Otherwise, you're going to spend so much time playing what-if games and hypothetically. The peasant railgun. Go Google that one up if you're curious what I'm saying. No, you just don't want to waste. Eventually, you'll hit a phase where you'll have fun with that, but day one, you don't want to wrestle with any of that. Early on, you don't want to mess with that. Intelligence check versus wisdom check. When do you need to know to do that? Well, first and foremost, most of your published adventures are going to tell you DC 15 perception, or you'll see PER perception, INV for investigation, intelligence, wisdom, interchangeable to an extent. Wisdom is noticing, intelligence is knowing, if that makes sense. Wisdom is I feel something wrong. Intelligence is I know what's wrong. Okay? Intelligence is not saying, I know I feel something's wrong. Intelligence is once it's been identified, I know what it is. The two can work hand in hand together, but they are not interchangeable. They're not interchangeable unless you're feeling on a one-for-one basis. Now, you can interchange history with arcana or religion with history, which is using wisdom or intelligence skill, but by and large, a wisdom save or an intelligence save is not interchangeable. Let your party argue when you say, I need a DC 15 perception. Well, can I use investigation because I kind of know where I'm looking? Yeah, go for it. Encourage them to maybe, play the rule a little bit that way, but they're not interchangeable on a one-for-one basis every time. Exceptions prove the rule as usual. Okay, the roll of the dice. Once again, you'll find your rhythm on this. You'll find a pace. You'll be tempted to go with rolling with it because you'll feel like it's absolutely fair. I don't have to do anything. It's up to the dice. The dice decide the outcome of any choice that the players make, and that's very, very true. But when everything comes down to a die roll, you're also removing any point of player creativity unless you educate it with advantages and disadvantages. I'm going to talk to the guard and try to figure out the location of the goblin caves. Okay, what are you going to say? I don't care. What do I got to roll? Well, I guess use disadvantage on your persuasion check then. That's arbitrary. That's what I'm saying. That's the challenge with the rolling with it. Ignoring the dice goes the other way. If someone doesn't feel like they're creative or whatever, then they're going to feel discouraged in your game to participate because they just need to know what button to push on their sheet. And I'm like, go play Skyrim if you want to push buttons. Go play World of Warcraft. There's lots of buttons to play on that. That's a negative extreme of that. Every one of these things that we're discussing on the running the game chapter, they are subjective to you and your party and your game. Know the baseline understanding and then adjust for your group, okay? Fostering respect is something that should be day one. Before you even sit down to roll a dice, you've had session 0. You've had session 0.5. You've had session 0.75 if you needed to before you've had session first to roll a game. Hopefully everyone's had some communication chat. At the same time, if you're picking up and running adventure leagues, this is purely pickup games. Expect to make sure that we're respectful to each other. Even if you don't have time to get to know each other and invest, you have time to be respectful. If you're an experienced player, don't be talking down to the noob. If you're the new player, you deserve to be treated with respect. As a dungeon master, you're the guy that needs to educate them when that's going on. You've got a brand new guy at your table, you've got an experienced girl at your table, and new guy's getting tore up, and experienced person's telling them, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this, you're being dumb, why are you doing that? Somewhere in there was the slip from being constructive to being critical. That's part of the respect thing. Distractions, that's for you and your own table. I mean, we play online, so I'm not sitting there over their shoulders watching how many windows they have open. Although I was laughing at one point. I had a guy that, it's like you're in Discord and you're playing World of Warcraft. Everyone in Discord can see that you're playing World of Warcraft right now, right? Come on, bro. Make a decision. That's one of those things there. Table etiquette is each group to its own. Express it in front. Be consistent with what you express, but be flexible enough to change if your group needs it to. Player communication. In character. Out of character, but in game, out of game. 3 different levels of communication. Make sure that you're being distinct between them, because sometimes you can get some hurt feelings, some misunderstandings. But no, I wasn't saying that as my character, man. I would never, come on, I would never, every time you talk about killing, well, that's just when we're talking out of game. So make sure that you've got those 3 graduations of communication to make sure there's no misunderstandings that lead to some unfortunate consequences. Promise you'll see that perfect example pop into your life. Dice rolling. The rule on them. Are we rolling in front of each other, or are you allowing them to roll hidden? As a DM, digitally, virtually, it's up to you. Are you rolling in front of the group, or are you rolling behind a screen? Uh, that's going to be tabletop or virtual. You have the option both ways. The integrity of the game is based on dice. No matter what happens, if your players see that number, your players see that number, and you act with that. Consistency. Don't drop back and forth in them. So yeah, that's kind of the. I wanted to go back to kind of touch a couple last things on it, but you know what, we're at a good stop point for this episode. This was a lot of etiquette, rules, and setup for day one of running the game. These are things that you're going to encounter at your table that you need to be prepared for. Well, shit, some of this is decisions you need to make prior to it. This is kind of session -1, as it were. You need to have in your heart and your mind, what is your position on all of these things before you sit down to talk to your group at session 0. This is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to do. This is what's acceptable. This is what is not acceptable. If we have a rules breakdown, let's go with it and research it later. All of these things are issues, and I don't want to say issues, items that you need to be aware of and have decisions on prior to stepping into your session 0, okay? Chapter 8, Running the Game, found in the Dungeon Master's Guide, is the next step for you prior to your setup. We've talked about the rules. We've talked about etiquette to an extent. We've talked about how to run a combat. We've talked about what all of that stuff means. Now we're putting it together. We're getting ready to go forward with our group. Up till now, this hasn't taken everything that I've talked to up to this point has not included your players. This has all been stuff that you as a dungeon master, you need to get familiar with. And certainly your players need to learn their spells. They need to know the sequence of combat. They need to know action versus bonus action. That's a minimum for anyone playing the game. Straight up. That's not even an opinion. That's something that shamefully should be required of everybody. Gets better through repetition. That's a plus side of it. Okay. What we're talking about in this session has been running the game. Things that you have needed to decide upon before you present them to your group. These are things that'll happen. And like I said, they're not specific. And if you notice, there's none of this is specific in rules. None of this is specific in conditions. This is in a continuation of last week's adventure things that you need to know as a dungeon master to get into running, to get your next step. So, I think we're going to go ahead and freeze it here. Like I said, I think every single thing in this chapter, in this section, all the way down to, we didn't get to, we'll take the next thing, next section here in a second. There's a lot more to keep in mind. You know what? That's going to be more for advanced. I think all the way up through using ability scores, table rules, the roll of dice, using ability scores. The first 3 sections of chapter 8. Had to emphasize that, are very, very, very important for the next step of your journey as a dungeon master. Know all the rules. Now we're starting to see where are these going to be applied. So the next thing from here is going to be your session 0. And we'll kind of get into depth on that. I know this is a long-winded way of doing it. I think it's important to break things down into each section so you understand how they add up into the whole. If you had your session 0 before you had any concept of the understanding of the rules, you're going into your first game and you're freaking out. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to run a combat, but we're doing it tomorrow. Let's go. Okay. So that's why we're structuring this the way this is. This is everything you needed to know before you sat down. So, we're going to wrap up here. Next stop will be session 0. And then we'll start getting into kind of going back through the next layer into advanced concepts that will apply to each thing. But hopefully when we're done with the next session, you should be confident in knowing what to look for and where to look so you can get to rolling the dice. So, DMGeezerjim, thanking you once again. If you've enjoyed this video, any of the ones in the series, like, follow, subscribe. Leave me some feedback, guys. If there's things that you want more information on, please put it in, throw a comment up in there. I need to say this at the beginning as well. I'm used to doing Twitch. I'm getting more into the D&D thing. I'm used to being able to answer questions live as we go. Feel free to join me Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. Join me for a Twitch chat. I'm going through a lot more specifics. You can see a lot of the general stuff that I'm talking about, the holistic stuff in play in practical application as we plan our adventures out. So yeah, but there's that. Hey, shameless plugs. If you want to help me out and continue these this series of videos and a lot more like it, um, help me out over on my Patreon page. We've got some Etsy stuff. I do a lot of virtual tabletop mapping. Several, probably 3 or 4 dozen maps available over on Etsy for low price of purchase. But above all else, if like, follow, subscribe, do all of that cool stuff. Share it with your friends if you know someone that's thinking about getting into D&D. Maybe not be sharing at level episode 7 because I've got lots more coming. But hopefully this series will be a good aid for everybody. But hey, DMGeezerjim signing out. And again, thank you so much for sharing your time with me. Would love to hear some feedback. And until next time, be safe.